Welcome to Our Drummers Musicians, your backstage pass to Melbourne's vibrant music scene. Normally recorded on a cosy couch in Brunswick, today we are coming to you from our guest's home, but still continuing our exploration of what it truly means to be a musician by speaking with the diverse talents that make music in our city. Today we are chatting with Megan Burslem, a violist, educator and researcher who is leading the charge in fresh conversation about music in the contemporary landscape. Megan holds a Bachelor of Music Honours, Bachelor of Arts, Master of Music Performance, Master of Teaching, Secondary, and a PhD in Musicology and Ethnomusicology. Megan Burslem is a radio presenter and host of Classic Breakfast on ABC Classic. In previous years, she was the host of Mornings on ABC Jazz and Classic Drive on ABC Classic. When she's not hosting music radio, you can hear Megan as a guest host on various ABC Radio Melbourne shows. Join us today as we discuss Megan's various roles and thoughts about music, and even take our title question a step further to ask, are musicologist's musicians? We want to take a moment to acknowledge the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung peoples of the East Kulin Nations as the traditional custodians of the land where we are recording the podcast today. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging.
Oh, I love that. That's so cool.
Oh, thank you.
You've got like a real groove to start. It's put me in a really good mood.
Excellent. Well, welcome to the podcast, Megan.
Thank you.
You were just saying that you wanted to be a drummer.
I did.
Tell
I
me
wanted to be
more.
a drummer. I was 12 and my musical career, let's use that word, up until the age 12 consisted of Suzuki piano lessons with the local priest's wife in the front room of the parish and private recorder lessons with a man called Mr. Spink.
Wow.
Who wore these great kind of golfing socks and slippers and got us to play discoteca recorder with like backing cassette tracks.
Wow.
And so I didn't really like music too much by the time I was 12, but start of high school and often, they'll say, do you want to come and learn music and learn an instrument? And I thought, yes, I want to be a jazz drummer. I want to be a drummer.
Wow.
And I was so set on that, on being a drummer. So I walked into the instrument room where they're showcasing all the instruments. They've got all the music teachers there and everything laid out so students can see what's on offer. And this little 12-year-old Megan walks in, I want to be a drummer, thinking that I was going to be a drummer and, learn that. So the music teacher at the time said to me, that's a boy's instrument.
Whoa.
And I thought, oh, is it? Oh, okay, cool. I mean, you're 12, and back then, when was that? I don't even want to count the years ago that was, but there was not much dialogue around sticking up for yourself as a girl.
Right.
And saying, no, I want to learn the drums. So I said, oh, okay, I will maybe oboe. And they said, well, you kind of can't because your teeth are, this is me pre-braces. They're like, you kind of can't because your embouchure is not going to be good. And I was a bit put off and I thought, oh, okay, well, maybe I'm going to be playing badminton or something. So I went into the strings room. They had all the strings instruments out there and it had this funny smell, like this wood smell and the smell of rosin and, very unfamiliar to me. And the music teacher took a look at my hands and she was like, you've got massive hands. You should play the viola.
Oh.
And I said, what's the viola? And then I walked home with a viola.
Wow.
And the rest, they say, is history. So that was the entry into my viola playing days.
Yeah. Well, what a rough beginning to like the world of music education.
I still want to play drums. I'm 36 now and I still crave to learn it. I always say if I'm going to pick up an instrument as an adult, it will be drums.
Well, I think you should. It's never too late to start. And I used to teach, a teenager drums privately, and then the mum said I'd like to learn as well. So we did back-to-back drum lessons.
Oh, that's really cool.
It was awesome.
My mum took up the trombone when my sister and I were in high school because she got a job working in the music department doing all our admin. And there was a trombone left at the end of all the students hiring out instruments, and there was this kind of lone lead trombone. So she decided to learn the trombone, and it just happened to coincide with Don Burrows moving into our area. So she learnt from Don Burrows.
Wow.
I know, who was also teaching himself the trombone because he had arthritis, and it was an easier instrument for him to play, rather than clarinet and flute.
Yeah, right. Wow.
Yeah. So it was pretty amazing. She kept it up for years. It's cool.
Wow. So how did it go from that to, doing so much music study as a violist and then everything else? Like, you've sort of taken it from just like being given an instrument because you got big hands to like the full extreme of study.
Yeah, it was a strange process, and not one that I didn't have my eyes on a prize or anything like that. I was pretty aimless when it came to music study, and I went to a really small country school, with a very dedicated music program and incredible teachers, but nonetheless, there weren't big opportunities down in the area.
Because you were in Lake Central?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Gunai country. And so I was a little aimless when it came to music, but I loved it, and I loved the social element of it as well, the band camps and all that cool shit that you do in high school, that, the after school rehearsals and your band friends and your string orchestra friends and stuff that you get to hang out with. This is a wonderful club. And I think on reflection, what I loved so much about it and why I stuck to it through high school was that two things I think were really important to me. One was the performance, being on stage, receiving applause, all that sort of thing, something that I actually felt a lot of shame around, that I was seeking this, public recognition or attention in some way. But as an adult, I reflect on it and think, no, it's just a really wonderful way to be able to express yourself and be seen and heard. But the second thing was that vulnerability, that you get to really be vulnerable with music students. I think at that age, especially where you're trying to figure out who you are, you're going through puberty and everything's going wrong, and you're trying to figure out relationships and the crushes that change week to week and lots of things. And I think music was such a fantastic way to be vulnerable and put yourself out there, make mistakes in front of people, and put yourself into very stressful situations for a young kid, really. And at the end of school, I wasn't going to continue on with it at university, and I wanted to be a director. It was basically, the stage was calling all the time. And so I thought, well, maybe studying to be a director would be a great course to take. So I studied at Swinburne, but I missed it. I missed it so much. I missed playing. I missed the kind of identity, the group identity, what comes with having an instrument with you wherever you go, and what your life is with that instrument. So after a year of studying film and television, I switched to music at Monash, and so that I would have been 19 at the time, and I started out at Monash University. And I think that typical, I guess the way that a career at university can progress is that you get to the end of a bachelor and you go, I need to make some money, and I can't. And I just kept studying, and I loved study. I loved the freedom that went with university study, the opportunities that came with it, the friends that you make, incredible. Again, vulnerability and that real connection and doing something together is, I think, an experience of study that not a lot of people get if you're not in the performing arts or in these really close-knit, vulnerable spaces. And I just kept going, and I kept going and going. So I did a little bit of overseas study, went to Belgrade in Serbia for a couple months and studied over there, and got an idea of what it was to study classical music in Europe, which was pretty amazing. And came back to Monash and just, I kept going and went all the way through. And I think it was toward the end of my Masters of Viola Performance that I said to my incredible music teacher, Caroline Henbest, I said, I don't want to do this anymore. I was always a student who was, every single report said the same thing. You're so musical, but you don't practice. You're so musical, but you know, your technique needs work. And so I was a student who everyone was always, I think, slightly disappointed in. You know, just push yourself, Megan, just go the extra mile, just come on. But there was constantly something in my body and my mind that I was thinking, it's not for me. This is not, I'm not really smitten with this lifestyle. So that changed to kind of leaving the viola behind, I guess, in a way, when I was late 20s and moving into PhD world and studying musicology and ethnomusicology. And I studied tertiary education initiatives in Australia for that topic. So it was a real change of direction and a real change of lifestyle that came with that as well.
Okay.
You know, ditching the music practice and going for pure straight academia was very eye-opening.
Yeah, it would be so different from all of the excitement you have about this camaraderie and working and performing and
practicing alone on your own in a room.
Well, that's true too.
Let's get real here about what it means to be a classical musician. That's hours and hours of solo practice.
Yeah.
It was really different. And the experience of doing a PhD was unlike anything else. Yeah.
Did you find that you were used to doing hours of solo practice, so doing hours of research was not so difficult?
Well, was I used to doing hours of solo practice, or did I just procrastinate it all the time, not really ever do it? My journey with, discovering that I'm neurodiverse has been a very recent one and a really cool one to think back on and go, oh, no wonder I used to break my practice up into 10-minute blocks, and I used to have very specific, I had to break it down into, I am practicing these 2 bars for 10 minutes and then after that I'm doing this single scale for 10 minutes and then I'm moving to, and then I have a reward in place. You know, it was all that kind of particular way that I made myself practice. And that didn't really apply to the PhD. I have to say I procrastinated and I kept the topic in my head and I feel like I did all of the work in my head without actually writing a word until I had to. And I wrote, I think, half of my PhD in the last 7 weeks.
Wow.
It was a marathon and I got up every morning at 6 a.m. and I just sat there for 8 hours in this hyper focus and I wrote the whole thing right at the end. But I curated my PhD to suit my social needs. So it was all based on interviews and discussions and conversations and it was ethnographic in style. So it was really good for me that it was based around conversations with people. Yeah.
I think it's sort of interesting maybe if you could explain briefly like what musicology and ethnomusicology are.
That's a can of worms. I mean, we can open it for sure.
Maybe just in the context of like how much it relates to music versus it being more like a philosophy type of study.
Oh, interesting.
Or like, just about like culture and place. But
totally. It's a really good question. I think we need to separate, in a way, musicology and ethnomusicology. Ethnomusicology is music as culture. So you're studying, culture of music making and how music appears and how it is with people at the core. So, I guess in a way, storytelling and how music plays that central role in understanding our identity. But essentially, ethnomusicology is music as culture, and musicology is the study of music. I mean, that's a very bland, vanilla term to describe it. But what I did and how I kind of explored the term musicology is this looking at music without the practical element, as a musicologist, to understand music in so many different forms. The problem is with musicology is that it got a really bad reputation of being this stuffy, irrelevant, only looking at old dead white composers and things like that. But it's not. It's such a rich and incredible tapestry of thought about music and study of music, and it's how we understand what we do as performers, how we play music, how we interpret it. And I feel that without musicology and that thought and the research and the huge tradition of studying music, we wouldn't be in a very stable place with making music itself. So I do feel, because, you know, where we practice in a tradition, and I say we kind of largely, we practice in a tradition of pre-existing music, and we model off pre-existing music, and every musician does that. We don't exist in a vacuum. You know, we take our inspiration from what has come before us, no matter what style we play in. But especially with classical musicians and jazz musicians, you know, we interpret existing music. And so the musicology and that the musicologists who open a window into knowledge about that music that we wouldn't necessarily have, I think is priceless.
Well, you've taken like a pretty wild step from, you know, performance life and goals to then like academic ones, but now also like in the public life as a, you know, presenter of all these different like music shows.
Yeah.
And I suppose, you know, how much do you think that with each change you still consider yourself to be a musician? Or do you feel like they become more and more adjacent as you like study and then present other people's works?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is toasty. Sometimes I think, yes, I'm a musician because it's informed everything really in my life, career-wise, and also learning about who I am as a person. It's such a big part of my identity. But I don't practice anymore. You know, I'm not a practicing musician anymore. But I feel that could change tomorrow, or in 3 weeks, or in 7 years. You know, so I don't feel that I've left it behind. But it's just not part of my current, you know, offering. But I don't think I could do what I do in the way that I do it without having that experience. Having said that, I know a lot of people who work in my field who haven't been musicians, and they're sensational music communicators, just extraordinary. So I don't think you need it to be able to communicate around music. But for me, I do draw on my experience quite a lot, I think, in that context. But yeah, it's another kind of iteration. And I think with broadcasting and talking about music, I found my niche. You know, I found what I'd been searching for in the playing it and studying it and all that sort of thing. And, you know, looking back, I think, oh, Megan, all you wanted to do was talk. Like, you just after conversations and, you know, conversations around music, but also around life and music together. So I feel like I've found my place.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's nice to hear that you feel like that because you're so good at it.
Thank you.
You're super talented, and it comes across, you know, in all the things that you're doing. But it's also nice when someone says like they feel at home doing the thing that they're doing, rather than, I think, not that it's bad for people to be uncomfortable in what they're doing, but often there's a lot of like, oh, I don't know if I should be here in doing this role, but they still might be a really talented, you know, in whatever job they do. But like specifically musicians often have a bit of imposter syndrome or something.
Absolutely. I mean, that's every profession. I'm sure the imposter syndrome will rear its ugly head. And I get that, you know, in broadcasting all the time, you know, not all the time. I shouldn't say that. I do feel very confident with the microphone in front of my face. You know, it's how I spend my days every day now. But it does feel right, and I think that's a really nice thing to discover. And I guess I have one of the very few jobs in that space, which I feel very privileged about, and very lucky that it happened in my life. Yeah.
Well, what are you most excited about with the music that you're bringing forward now?
Oh, so much. I mean, the other day I discovered this, as an example, I discovered this track by a Cuban composer called Beatriz Corona. And this beautiful vocal track. It's a couple minutes long. There's these amazing, you know, choir harmonies. And I was just so excited because music will never be uninspiring. It will never not touch you. It will never not strike you down in a way and say, you think that you've heard so much, but you know, take a listen to this.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that as a broadcaster, I listen to so much music every day. There is so much music that we play. That's 20 hours of music a week that I broadcast, as well as all of the extra kind of things that you listen to and you hear, and going to events and concerts and all that sort of stuff. So my listening is absolutely massive. And then the exciting thing is that the world of classical music now that I work in is just so massive. It's this ocean that I'm not even a cup of water in that ocean of music that exists. And I'm talking beyond the Western art music, classical, to classical music worldwide. But yeah, I feel that it's just never ending. Sometimes that can be daunting and overwhelming, but that every single day there'll be a brand new discovery and something that makes you, go get goosebumps and feel so excited about life that you hear this stunning harmony. I'll have to send you the track.
Yeah, please. So where is it that you find new music now, especially in the classical world? Is it similar to, other types of music where like people putting out songs on streaming platforms or performances live coming around to play new music?
Yeah, I think a few ways. I work with a programmer for my show. So we're a team of 3 essentially that create Breakfast on ABC Classic. It's myself as the presenter. I've got this fantastic producer and a programmer as well. And the programmer, his name is Angus, and he will find all sorts of new music that comes through, broadly to ABC Classic. And so we have a central team, and that's really amazing that the team of programmers experience all this new music coming in and the new releases and, industry notifications of new releases and new music and things like that. So that's one way. And Angus is just an extraordinary programmer and, really great at curating an offering for breakfast hours. Also, I've been spending a little bit of time in the ABC library, which is full of these great LPs that no one really accesses anymore. So these fantastic, older recordings of classical music and this stuff that is so wacky and out there and, but also those recordings, crackly old Yehudi Menuhin playing something and, kind of flicking through that LP. And I'm talking shelves and shelves and shelves and shelves, like 20 record stores full of just classical stuff. And then that's not even the jazz collection, which has been so beautifully curated by Mel Stanley over the years and everything. It's a little bit messy, Mel, I have to say, your little section. But yeah, that's another way. But I'm also, because I've been doing a lot of work on social media platforms to kind of reach out and say, this is what I do. If you have a release or if you have something that you would like me to play, send it on. And that started off quite slowly. I was getting, a few people message me a week saying I've got a new release or something like that. And now it's just kind of off the charts with the requests I get for I've got this new release or I've got music that I think it would be good for your show and stuff like that. So I feel at times I need an assistant to kind of sort through and give this music the attention that it deserves. But we do have a fantastic team at the ABC who write across all of that. So there's many different ways, and that's just classical. I also do mine the playlists of other radio stations, which has been really interesting. Like looking to what's happening in California or what's happening in Ireland, or these great music programs that happen that you think, oh, I've never heard of that person. And I feel that going to specific countries, you're going to get more of their composers as well. Just like someone would come to ABC Classic and they'd find a ton of Australian composers that we play. So, discovering that way is fantastic. But beyond classical music, pretty much as soon as I guess I switch off work mode, I switch on to other styles of music. So that's been really cool the last few years to, dive into other styles and genres.
So there's still space in your life for music for pleasure rather than
Oh yeah,
just at work.
totally. Yeah, I mean, I like to dance a lot. You know, I'm a person who kind of uses dance at home to shake off stress and all that sort of or gear me up for something. Or so you know, music for dance is really important in my life and that sort of thing. But the last few years, I mean, I feel like the last few years I've discovered more music than I ever have because I've been working with this fantastic producer who came with me when I started Breakfast. He came up from local radio and he was producing Sammy J. His name is Chris Hollow, and he is absolute music, you know, like an encyclopedia of music. And he has been introducing me to so much from the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, you know, from you know, the Fleetwoods through to the Velvet Underground. You know, it's been such an amazing journey to combine as well knowledge of music that exists, particularly from the 20th century, with classical music, because so much comes from classical music that we experience in pop and rock. And to constantly have those connections drawn has been amazing. Like we were having this big chat about Serge Gainsbourg and Jane Birkin and the music that they released. It's all Brahms and Dvorak and, you know, heavily inspired by these composers. And for me, it's the joining of the dots and the de-siloing of musical styles that has been the biggest motivator, I think.
So where do you think the current climate of like Australian composers in classical music is going? Because, you know, when I think about classical music or what like a general perception of classical music is often that old, you know, 20th century and earlier famous composers, and the orchestras are often playing a similar amount of repertoire from those same composers.
You mean non-Australian composers or dead composers, or, you know, like your Brahms or your, you know.
Exactly, or Mozart and Beethoven and
Tchaikovsky.
Like, you know, there's sort of like a best of
the canon, canon,
exactly. But there is lots of current Australian music happening.
So much.
It's just, I suppose, not very well known.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts on this actually, is that we are, I think individually, we're often a product of our education, and we're the product of who we hang out with and who our teachers have been, who our parents are, who, you know, our partners are, that sort of thing, and we're a collection of all of their knowledge as well. So we've been exposed to what they were exposed to, and it's quite rare, I think, for someone to say, I'm going to go and learn something new, I'm going to discover something new for myself without someone or a situation prompting that. So I feel that the longer that we perpetuate the playing of the canon, the longer that we perpetuate the knowledge of particular songs, particular styles, particular genres, that's what we're going to recycle and reuse because we know it, it's familiar. And that also pulls an audience. You want to go and see something that you know and love. You want to go and see your favourite band, even though you've listened to their stuff a gazillion times. You want to go and see that, or you're going to put that album on again because you just love it. You know, how many times have you listened to your favourite LP over and over and over and over again? So I feel that looking beyond is a really difficult thing to do and requires a bit of effort. When people are busy and they're stressed and, you know, life happens around them, it's easy to fall back into what we know and what we do. There is so much here in our country and it's right there. It doesn't require much skill to find it. It doesn't require much energy to find it. It's waiting for discovery, and also it is being discovered and it is being pushed and promoted and celebrated in so many different contexts. It's just entering those contexts and being a person who grabs it and says, yes, this is going to become a part of my knowledge bank. And I feel that as a broadcaster, especially, you know, on the ABC we're the public broadcaster, to be promoting and to be celebrating Australian music is at the core of what we do. But I don't think it's also coming down to an individual person and the individual people who make those decisions on programming, things like that. But it's also up to those in a position of power in some way when it comes to education initiatives at a very young level, when it comes to government initiatives, when it comes to funding initiatives to get this music up and out there in the world. You know, musicians can't afford to constantly record their own music that costs, you know, without support. So I feel that it's everyone's responsibility to be seeking music, to be celebrating music that is beyond what you already know. And having said that, I also firmly believe that an audience is there for something that's familiar. So what I try to do as a broadcaster is combine the familiar and the unfamiliar. Is to say, here is Mozart's Clarinet Concerto. It's one of the most loved pieces of music ever written, or whatever it might be. Now we're going to hear a brand new release from Australian composer that is new to your ears. And I feel that that is the way in. And to provide the story, to provide the understanding for a listener to say, yeah, why are you going to love this as much as you love Mozart? And why in 10 years' time, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years' time, are you going to be saying, I'm going to a concert to see that composer alongside Mozart, or I'm going to a performance to see a work that I heard 50 years ago and I've been in love with that composer ever since.
So what do you think about this then? When you have like a new composition and you have people that are out there listening to something that they know, but you like them to listen to something new, like is the responsibility on the composer to be creating music for people that they would like? Or do you think there's a place for, you know, it being purely about the composer creating whatever it is they want, and the responsibility is on us as, you know, Australians to be supportive of the creation of new art? Or some other version of this that I haven't, you know,
great question.
Put out to you.
You know, it's a great question. I think that we need to be creating art that's authentic. You know, that is it. I feel the core of why we are so attracted to things is because they come from a place of authenticity. They come from a place of a genuine expression of self. Having said that, the music industry is really difficult to. Can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah, I haven't decided if I'm going to bleep them out or not yet.
Okay, I won't.
No,
I won't,
people have sworn. I just.
You're going to put a beep in place.
I don't know.
I think that it's so difficult to navigate that artists have to think about what pulls an audience because we need to think about money. I'm not a composer. I never have. I haven't negotiated that space, but I've talked to a lot of composers and know a lot of people, artists, you know, in particular, who have to do both. They have to create something that they know will pay bills, and they create something that is so authentic to them. And some artists do both. Some artists create music that feels right to them, and it also feels right to a big audience. Other artists create music that feels right to them and it feels right to a smaller audience. I think it's a difficult one to say it should be this or should be that, because the industry as we know it is so difficult. It's so hard. It's, you know, we just had that study came out to say half musicians in Australia earn less than $6,000 a year. Yeah. I mean, that's just absurd. So what are we doing? How are we valuing music? And I think that comes down to it is, how do we value music? Do we say it only has value if it earns a lot of money or reaches a big audience? In that case, we're only going to be celebrating Taylor Swift and Harry Styles and Lizzo and Beyonce. What about an amazing performance that's given to 12 people in a jazz club in a suburb of Melbourne, you know, and that happens every day. Beautiful, sensational, authentic, engaging music that doesn't make any money and reaches an extremely small audience. And we need that. We need all iterations of it. So I think it is up to us to appreciate it. It's up to us to say, what do I want to see? If I enjoy going to see that music and there's 12 other people, great. I mean, how good is that experience for me? I get these musicians almost giving me a private performance kind of thing. And then also you find yourself in a stadium gig, you know, screaming along with one of these superstar performers, which we've all been there. Yeah. So it's an ecosystem, and it can only work with every single iteration, I think. But for me, and I feel a bit weird saying this because I'm not creating music at the moment, but for me it comes down to authenticity. And as if you're creating from a place of authenticity, then go for your life. We just need to find ways of supporting everyone who does that.
Yeah. Well, how do you feel about like the introduction of like cinematic music to like the classical sort of genrering?
Yeah, I mean, your use of the word introduction to is so telling, because often we feel that lately in the last decade or 2 decades, film music has been a way in for so many people, but Stravinsky wrote for film. You know, we have these composers who, Korngold wrote for film. You know, we go right back to, you know, golden age of Hollywood. Before that, you know, we had people writing for stage, Gershwin, you know, the Gershwins.
Yeah.
And it's just a continuation of that. It's a continuation of everyone who has, you know, composed a suite of music that to be performed at the same time as a Shakespeare play, or it's the same thing. It's just that I think because the style, the sound is perhaps changing in many different ways and staying the same, that a lot of people are thinking, well, this industry is so big that it's a new addition, but it's always been big. I think actually it's the video game composition space which is the most interesting, because all of a sudden we're seeing composers employed in a completely different way. And writing in a completely different way, you know, where the course of the video game changes. You know, you're composing in a way that goes with the game, and games are having all sorts of iterations of, you know, player folk, however you choose your own adventure kind of, and how composers are writing in that space. That space, the video game space in general, is bigger than the music and the film industry combined. It's absolutely huge. And so for me, that how that is going to support composers around the world, how many opportunities there are for composers in that space and the film music space is just, it's extraordinary. And I love to see the diversity of game music soundtracks coming out. You know, we can hear soundtracks that are these beautiful Debussy-inspired solo piano, very classical scores where we're you know, discovering scores that would have just as much a place on Double J or Triple J as they would on ABC Classic. And for me, that's sensational, and I think that's a real way in. We don't need to be playing video games. We don't need to be watching films to enjoy these scores.
Yeah.
So I feel that they are wonderful ways into the classical music world, but we can't forget the long legacy of creating music in that space, which I feel has, just informed everything that we're doing today.
I might have to cut this out because it will show my lack of classical music knowledge.
Don't cut it out, because I want you to have a lack of classical music knowledge, because everyone does. Every single person does have that lack of knowledge. So I think you should just go for it.
All right. Well, if I remember from my study of musicology and some like classical music history from, you know, uni, and I did like all the music subjects in high school, and I found it so interesting to learn that there were a lot of composers and pieces that are quite famous that were actually just commissioned by a family for their party or event.
Yeah.
And I think that I imagined the composer as the artist sitting in the room looking out at the sky, you know, being inspired, and then writing a piece in a purely artistic context, not in the context of, the rich family with the castle is having a dinner party next month and they need new music to present to, you know, the party guests.
Yeah.
And it's such a wild thing of, well, what roles are there for composers, and the way that then they get picked up and then performed, and it's taken from a small ensemble and then given to an orchestra. Like Handel's Messiah, if I remember right, was written for a very small ensemble, and again on commission, not out of like a pure artistic direction.
This is a really interesting topic, and so many different iterations of how this has happened over, in different times and in different places around the world as well. I mean, if we're talking largely kind of European classical music composition, then yes, I mean, Bach was a composer who came from a family of musicians. It was the family trade.
Yes,
it's something that they did in their family was create music. And Bach is a great example, I think, because a lot of his music was created for particular events, and because his employer said, I need a piece of music for this, and he had to write it. That was largely, a big chunk of his career. And then he had an employer who really valued the arts and said, I want you to kind of write some things that people are going to love. Mm-hmm. This new way for Bach, at least, of exploring music that wasn't for an event or wasn't for a particular situation. And he started to really experiment with what music he could put out into the world. I think the cello suites were one of those incredible compositions that came from that experimenting and just saying, well, this is not for a particular event. But throughout history, everyone's had to surrender to an employer or to someone who commissions from them. I don't know many composers over history who haven't had to do that and haven't had to think about their career and their life as a composer. Perhaps people who came from a really well-to-do background, who could support themselves, who had that, wealth, intergenerational wealth, perhaps. But I mean, composers have struggled for a long time. I mean, we have this wonderful example with Mozart of how much he had to hustle, constantly hustling. And, he died in poverty. His music wasn't really appreciated after he died, and it was only kind of later that it had this big resurgence. But if you didn't have a particular position, if you weren't a Kapellmeister, it was really hard to make money, and you went commission to commission, essentially, or you would have music students as well. You would teach. That's what a lot of composers did. And we often forget that, I think, because we feel at this time, I mean, talking in 2024, that their music has somehow been immortalized and that the music was always going to exist. But in their life, it wasn't. And there were so many composers who couldn't be composers because they couldn't make, they couldn't have a career from it. They couldn't support themselves or a family by being a composer. And some of them we don't hear about because they ceased to write music and they did something else.
It's so interesting that you use the term trade, like music as a trade, because two other guests that I've had on the podcast already have also used that phrase. El Kerr, like the Brazilian percussionist, was talking about, musicians at music school that go, I want to like be a working musician and do whatever work comes. So, like weddings and corporate events and just playing for hire. And then Rel Williams also used the term to describe her, being a person with music as a trade, being hired as a session vocalist and working in all sorts of different platforms. And it's very interesting to think about, well, is this video game composition world the next sort of phase of the trade of composing, and will the people that are in that sphere then go on to do an artistic endeavor after, or will there be concerts of the music of the
absolutely I mean that's
the
happening
video game
right
live?
now. Absolutely. I mean, that's happening now. That's a huge industry and a huge that's currently happening. But I mean, we hone our craft. We spend so long doing it. I mean, I'm not exempt from that as a broadcaster. I spend countless hours perfecting a craft, or it never happens, aiming to get to a certain point. I'm not going to say the word perfecting because that doesn't exist for anyone. But to think about it, to explore it, to practice it, to come at it from different angles, to support all of the admin and the shit that goes along with working a particular job. The same goes with musicians. It's Simon Birmingham famously called it a lifestyle choice to undertake, a career in the arts.
I remember.
And how wrong he could be. Pretty sure it was Simon Birmingham.
I think so, yeah.
just disastrously wrong. I found it when I heard that, I remember life stopped for a moment. I thought, wow, this is someone's actual thought out, very, he's a thinker, it's a deep thinker. And this is what he thinks of being in the world of art.
Mm.
And I just thought that was outrageous, yeah.
We have such an interesting culture in Australia where sport is relatively similar to music in that you have someone pursuing something performance-wise to the nth degree. And we're very good at valuing sport in Australia and giving it lots of funding and support. But music is seen as, like you said, this lifestyle choice or this other thing. And I wonder how you think that the music culture fits in, especially because you work for the national broadcaster. Is it okay that Australia is doing this duality of, well, we support sport as the culture and we sort of do it with music, but not really. Classical music is the only spot where you can be a salaried musician. Everywhere else, there's no job for it. And it's such a small number. I don't know, this question is sort of lacking.
No, it's a great question. I feel that there are places in the music world that get a lot of money and support, exactly as you say, salaried positions and, certain iterations of music making get a lot of funding and a lot of support, and that might be from ballet to opera to, but as you were saying, beyond maybe a few very, I don't want to say lucky is the wrong word, but beyond some organisations and places where music is made, there's not a lot. I find that we do cling on a bit to the sport music comparison, and that's a comparison that I used to always make, and I would get really pissed off. I'd be like, I don't follow football, kind of get angry about it, and I'd be annoyed, and I'd really want to say, oh, that's shit. But I've come to this kind of understanding of sport in Australia and really appreciate it now as I get older. And I've never been into sport. Okay. I've never been someone who's played it or gone to see things, beyond a bit of cricket and stuff like that. But I feel that the benefits of sport are just so incredible. Community, coming together, that camaraderie, the identity that we have, that excitement event that you go and see, and I love it. I love that exists, and all I want to do is pull music like that. But we often think that sport is kind of, they've got more attention, they've got more love, they've got more value in our country, but more people see live music than they do sport by far. So actually we are going to see way more live music. It's maybe just not diversity of music, but I'm sure the same exists in the sport world, is that most people will say, well, you go see AFL or, men's, women's, you go to see cricket, you go to see basketball, but what about the smaller iterations of sport? And what about the sport on a community level? Are they getting, support as they need? And I feel it's the same in the music world as in the sport world, is that we look at these big, events of the grand final and all that sort of stuff. And then we might look at music, we might look at these big stagings of opera and ballet, and we might see, stadiums packed with people coming to see Australian artists, or, these big tours, festivals, another good example. Numbers are dropping there, I know, but, that exists. But what doesn't exist is the grassroots, support on a broader level. And I feel that we do have a long way to go there. I think sometimes it's a matter of accessibility cost. Some things can be really expensive. There aren't often a lot of free or accessible things to get to. I'm a country kid, so there wasn't really a lot for me to see growing up in the country because classical music didn't really exist down there. Jazz didn't. It was a few people who might be in the area, who might live in the area, who put on concerts or at an event or something like that, and you might get a glimpse into music making of a particular kind, but it was pretty rare. So I feel that for music, maybe having it in more corners of our world, accessible in more corners of our world, would be a really great focus for us. Community music making in areas that aren't capital cities or large cities, or where there are fewer people in our country. It's such a big place. And there are some wonderful organisations that really focus on that. Musica Viva, being one of them. I think the Australian Youth Orchestra, the programs that they run and things, and smaller ensembles in the classical music world to get out there. But yeah, I stopped bagging the shit out of sport, I have to say. The other thing is that I always like to remind people that sports teams are also choirs.
Interesting.
Well, they are. I mean, they come together to sing together, right? And no one talks about a sport team in regard to a choir, but they link arms on national television, international television. They sing, the coaches sing, everyone around them sings, everyone watching sings, everyone in the stadium sings together, your team song, the national anthem. Music is a big part of sport tradition. It's a huge part of sport tradition. And we often overlook that, so I think we should stop overlooking that and say, oh, hey, we're coming together not only through supporting a team, but also by singing and by having that, this is music as culture, isn't it? This is ethnomusicology.
I don't think I'll ever look at a football team singing the national anthem or their team song the same again.
Yeah.
I've just noticed what the time is. So I feel like we need to play the quick wrap-up games.
Yeah.
I call them games. I'm still learning what they are. But I have this thing that I haven't named yet where I get the guests to ask the next guest a question.
Oh, great. I love this. Yep.
So I've got a question for you.
Who's the next guest?
Oh, well, I don't tell you who the guest is so that you don't tailor the question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't know if that's better or not, but when I designed this, I liked the anticipation. And somehow I've ended up with two questions. So...
so someone's got two questions for me.
I've got two different people.
Great.
Would you like both questions?
Yes.
Great.
Why not?
All right. Well, the first question is from El Kerr, Brazilian percussionist that we mentioned before. It's a bit of a heavy question, just to
prepare me. Okay.
It's a variation on the if you couldn't do music, what would you do? But the question is, if you couldn't do music, how would you survive psychologically?
Easily, I think is my short answer. Easily. Because what we do doesn't define us, doesn't play into really our mental health journey. I think we find ourselves through anything that we do in life. And I feel that psychologically I'm not held up by music. I'm not supported by music, I mean. It's not a driver in that space, but the people who make music and the stories around music, just like the stories around sport or the stories around sculpture or the stories around whatever else you might do. I mean, if we're going to talk trade, it's if you didn't do music, you wouldn't be doing it for a reason, I think. And if you also didn't do music, you'd probably still enjoy it, without doing it.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
But I like it. It's a cool question. I love a question that's flipped on its head. Like that to me is, I spend a lot of time thinking about questions is actually a big part of what I do is, how am I going to ask this question, but how am I going to ask it in a way that they've never been asked before? And so I think Al did that really well.
He did. It's quite intimidating coming to talk to you about this because you're so...
I'm really sorry.
No, don't be sorry. All right, next question is from Tim Mallis.
Okay.
He's a young composer and piano accompanist.
If you could spend as much time as you wanted and learn a new instrument from scratch, what would it be?
It would be drums. It
Awesome.
would absolutely be drums. I mean, I couldn't think of anything cooler, really.
Yeah.
Brushes. I don't know what it is about the sound of brushes
Interesting.
on a snare. Oh, gets me every time.
Is there a drummer that you especially like the brushes playing of?
Ooh. No one comes to mind, but who was the amazing drummer who was working during World War II in the States? Oh, I forgot her name. You're going to have to leave that one with me.
Okay.
Oh, she was just remarkable. Big band drummer.
Oh,
Yeah.
I feel like I should know who this is.
I feel like I should as well. I'm the one answering the question. Her name escapes me, but she comes to mind. I think looking at her play was a really, fantastic thing for me to watch her perform.
Mm-hmm.
Terry Lynn Carrington, I guess, is another player who had a big place in my heart for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not her brushes. I don't actually ever remember recalling her playing with brushes, but I'm sure she does all the time. There you
Well, I
go.
don't know. Some do,
There's
some
an
don't.
answer.
Some love the brushes and some hate the brushes.
I'm thinking the awesome schmaltzy brush, 50s jazz.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. I guess I would recommend Max Roach
Yeah, right. Okay. Thanks.
because his album Words Not Deeds
Mhm.
is a solo drums album. And a lot of it features brushes,
Yeah.
and you could just put it on and sit down and
Oh, I love that.
yeah.
I grew up with an album, an LP that my dad used to play. Is it, what's it? Is it Sandy Nelson? No. Oh my God. I'm searching for my phone. It's nowhere near me. The Birth of the Drums, is it called? The Birth of the Drums. Oh, it was an LP that I used to love. I used to call it the Monster Record because it sounded scary.
The Monster Record.
Birth of the Drums. Here we go. We're looking.
Sorry, Birth of the Drums.
Sandy. I've got the name wrong.
All right, let me try Sandy Nelson.
Dum.
Birth of the Beat.
Birth of the Beat. That's
Song
it.
by Sandy Nelson,
Sandy
released 1958.
Thank you. Yep, that's a great album. Loved that album growing up.
I'll have to check it out.
I'm thinking of my question now
Great.
for the next person.
Mm-hmm. Whilst you're thinking of a question, I will ask you a quick question. How do you feel about this, asking a question of someone that you don't know as a radio host?
Oh, it's
versus-
really cool. I want to nick it. I want to
Okay.
nick this idea.
Well, you're welcome to.
No. I won't do that to you. It's a really great thing to do at the end of a podcast. I love it. I love having another voice in the mix, that carryover. It'll make me want to listen to who comes next as well, to how they answer my question that I'm going to put to them. I think the art of interviewing is really great, something that I'm learning a lot about. But asking someone a question they've never been asked before is difficult. But you get answers that are really extraordinary because people are shocked. And they're like, oh, and they don't know how to answer it. So the first thing that comes out of their mouth is usually really quite authentic. And
Yes.
yeah, it's not rehearsed. They haven't wheeled out that story 900 times.
Well, I'm expecting a really awesome question from you.
God, now you put me on the spot. Okay. My question is, can you name 10 female composers?
Excellent question.
I'm just going to stop there. I'm not going to add a why. If you can't, why not? But, I mean, that's a good thing to unpack, I think.
Who are your 10 favourite female composers right now?
Yeah. Okay. Beatrice Corona from Cuba. I can't get enough of her vocal music at the moment. I've been really getting into Florence Price and her symphonic works, particularly. She's from the States.
Okay.
She's an African-American composer. I love Sally Greenaway. She's an Australian composer, and she writes some really beautiful chamber works. There's a particular work called Blue Mountains by Sally Greenaway, which is 2 minutes or something, and it's just short and stunning. More than that, I think Clara Schumann is a composer who we often talk about, but when you really dive into her catalogue, it's just extraordinary. At the same time, Cécile Chaminade, she's a French composer, and her work is remarkable. I'm a big fan of Cécile Chaminade. I feel that in Australia we've got some really exciting space in the contemporary piano space. So Belle Chen, for me, is a composer who I will constantly come back to. Nat Barch also in that space, I feel. Am I already at 10?
You're at 7.
I'm at 7. Okay. I think going back even further, when I want to really breathe out, it's Hildegard von Bingen, who is a 12th century composer. Again, right. A lot of vocal music, but there's some beautiful interpretations of her work that exist. Mm-hmm. So Hildegard, for sure. I think coming back to Australia, the music that Deborah Cheetham-Freyon actually composes for children's choir, the Dungala Children's Choir, when it comes to children's choir repertoire is just awesome. There's a piece called Mother Mountain, which is just so joyous. Brenda Gifford as well. She's a kind of jazz saxophonist. She's from Wreck Bay in New South Wales, and she writes about country and her connection to, and you know, there's a piece called Footprints, which is a really amazing group. It's got, I think, the best bass clarinet line in anything that's been written for a long, long time.
Oh, cool.
Is that 10?
Yeah.
Okay, I could keep going. There's so many, but I think that's a range for me at the moment that spans quite a few kind of iterations of the classical music world.
Mm-hmm. All right, we'll end with 5 quick fire questions.
Yes, I love these.
What's your favorite? No, I'm just going to ask them all the same.
Okay, yep.
What's your favorite venue to play in Melbourne?
Ooh, the Myer Music Bowl.
What is your dream venue to play at?
In Colorado, Red Rocks.
What's your coffee order?
An almond latte. If it's my second, it's a weak almond latte because I get the shakes.
Best place to get food after a gig?
Oh, anything that does nuggets or dumplings. You know, the cheap food that you just want to devour, and it feels a bit guilty and a bit delicious.
Is there one for like post morning show?
Oh, because I eat lunch at about 11 o'clock. Anywhere that's close to the ABC that I have to run back for all the meetings that happen after the show. No, I don't have anything off the top of my head for that one.
And what's one piece of advice that you'd give to your younger self?
Ask. Keep asking. Yeah. I don't think I would have got anywhere if I hadn't started asking people. Mm-hmm. And I wish I'd done that a little earlier.
Well, thanks for being so generous with your time today.
Oh, thanks for coming to my place.
No worries.
It's nice to just sit on my couch and answer these questions. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been so lovely to talk to you, and you're doing amazing things, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on Our Drummers Musicians. I hope you enjoyed getting to know another Melbourne muso like I did. Help us grow by leaving a review, share the podcast with friends and family, and subscribe on our website for extra info. Got a guest you'd love to hear on the show? Please let us know at ourdrummersmusicians.com. See you next time.